I'd love to see
believe
more.
that there are some modern names, figures in the game that are not au fait with footy as it was, because really you'd need to have an appreciation, I think, of the history of anything that you immerse yourself in professionally before you tackle the present.
Well, one of the problems, I mean, if you want a serious response, one of the problems I think is that when the likes, when people like me were cutting their teeth in football journalism, we got to write about the footy a lot, covering games, writing analysis, commentary, and, that's what I always wanted to do. But we got to write and analyse the game. I think because of the amount of former players that have got into the football media now, particularly electronic media, there's a much sharper division now between former players and journos, and the journos tend to be consigned to news gathering. And that means that their focus tends to always be on the here and now and less on the game. Because if you're studying the game, you actually do need to have an appreciation of at least a relatively modern history. And I think that's less the case if you're a news gatherer. I mean, it's possible to be a great newsbreaker and know stuff all about footy. And we're not going to be cruel here, but we could both mention one very high-profile person who fits that criteria exactly. Doesn't mean they're not a good football journalist, but they're certainly not an authority on the game of football. So I think that's changed a lot. Yeah. Shorty Jackson says, do you think footy media is more reactionary than ever, or has it always been this bad? Well, what do you mean by reactionary, Shorty? Are you meaning sort of knee-jerk going the early crow? Is that what you mean? I don't know. What do you think, Finey?
It's a bit of a is it amorphous? What's terms that really pretend to sort of purport to say something but don't really say anything? Of course, they're reactionary.
Bullshit
they react
usually works for me.
Yeah. And there's a German expression called Luftgeschäft, or Yiddish, I think. It just means air business. That is stuff that happens in the ether and doesn't really mean anything. And some of these sort of terms, reactionary. Well, what is reactionary? I guess they react to what happens. Journalists today, I think, there's a real clamour to be the best newsbreaker, and in doing so, a lack of observance of are there golden rules to breaking news stories? There should be. There should be checking your sources, verifying, and not flying things up, not running things up flagpoles or flying kites. And some of them are so clear, so transparent, so paper thin in their lack of diligence, or lack of even having a source. Just they seem to be light bulbs for these journos. They run them up the flagpole. It reeks of sort of Palace Insider, and there's too much of that going on.
Well, that's a whole different discussion, though, because that's about, is it more important to be first or to be right? And that applies to any topic, not just football. And that is a huge problem with the modern media, and it's been exacerbated by the advent of online media, where speed is essential. But see, my argument too, I don't know why, I don't want to get bogged down on this, but I don't know why for so many young people getting into the football media, the attraction is more that news-breaking role than being a student of the game. I'll tell you why, because the premium on even the best exclusive news story now is lower than it's ever been, for one simple reason. As soon as you publish an exclusive news story, it ceases to be exclusive after 10 minutes when all the other media outlets have seen it and desperately rewritten the story so they have it covered. So you don't get the same sort of kudos for a news exclusive now as you were even 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, of course. It doesn't sell papers.
Well, papers, yeah. I mean, the news.
Papers?
No, well, the news in print editions is 12 hours old by the time you read it. So
okay, so it doesn't sell subscriptions, really?
No, well, they don't know what. Can I just say this? I could go on all day about the media. But I was part of a major newspaper, and for at least 20 years, I was having this debate with people where I was saying, we've got online news now. The news in the print edition is 12 hours old when you read it. So what is the point? Why don't we scale back on the amount of hard news, still have hard news, but make sure it's the most important stories, and devote the space we're taking away from that to analysis of what is happening in the news, because that is an area that online doesn't necessarily cover and print can make its own. And people would inevitably say, yeah, I think you're right, and then just go on doing the same thing because there was never enough time, there was never enough resources, there was never enough thought put into what might be a really sustainable business model years down the track. And, it frustrates the bloody hell out of you, I can tell you that.